Welcome to This Explainer. We're diving into a truly extraordinary moment in the history of humanity. We are going to explore the 2,500-year-old Athenian Revolution. It's this surprisingly short window of time where a very small population of landowners, farmers, and sailors fundamentally rewired the human mind. Honestly, it's fascinating to see how the ideas born in this specific era, the European Axial Age, didn't just shape history, they actively dictate how we live, think, and govern ourselves today. Now, to really grasp the enduring emotional power of Greek thought, we're actually going to start in Memphis, Tennessee, in 1968. Robert F. Kennedy had just stepped off a plane and was informed that Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. In this famous, impromptu moment of immense national grief, he didn't reach for modern political rhetoric. No, he reached back 2,500 years. He quoted his favorite poet, Aeschylus, and offered the words you see right here. The fact that the raw, passionate insights of ancient Greek playwrights could speak so directly to a modern American tragedy, it proves these weren't just dusty historical figures. They were grappling with human nature at its absolute best, and for sure, its absolute worst. So, let's get into Section 1, the water we swim in. You know, it is almost impossible to overstate just how much of our modern world descends directly from this ancient civilization. When the Western world rediscovered Greek science and philosophy in medieval Europe, it literally kindled the Renaissance. Appreciating this Greek heritage is truly like a fish trying to appreciate water. It's just everywhere around us. The very way we study this legacy is a product of the legacy itself. We separate our search for knowledge into specific categories, right? Politics, philosophy, history, individual sciences. Well, those are Greek categories. The words we use every single day, technology, economics, logic, they're all Greek. Even our word school comes from the Greek word skoli. We are quite literally swimming in their ideas. Moving right along to Section 2, Solon and the Balance. Okay, let's dive into this. To understand how this structured way of thinking actually began, we have to look back to the early 6th century BCE. Athens was definitely not the peaceful, philosophical utopia we often imagine. It was severely disrupted by social unrest. Farmers were banding together against aristocrats, and civil war felt completely unavoidable. A huge part of this tension was that the laws were unwritten, the aristocrats controlled them, and, you guessed it, changed them whenever it suited them. So to forestall a civil war in 594 BCE, the aristocrats elected a poet named Solon to reform the constitution. Solon was this axial age thinker who had traveled the world, and he introduced a radical new idea to the Athenians. He looked at the chaos around them and defined it as dysnomia, disorder. But crucially, he told the people that this unstable political situation absolutely could not be blamed on the gods. It was the direct result of human selfishness. Solon argued that, hey, if humans caused the disorder, only a collaborative human effort could fix it. His goal was eunomia, which means good order and stability. To achieve this balance, he enacted some massive reforms. He completely abolished the debts that were crippling farmers, and he ended debt slavery entirely. He also created census ratings, meaning access to public office was now based on wealth, not just whether you were born into a noble family. And most importantly, he wrote the comprehensive code of law down on tablets for everyone to see. And then, this is the crazy part, setting the ultimate standard as an ideal citizen, Solon completely refused to stay in power as a tyrant. He simply walked away, having served as an equal.
Which brings us to Section 3, the birth of democracy.
Of course, human nature being what it is, Solon's departure left a huge vacuum, and his reforms weren't exactly accepted overnight. Athens actually lapsed right back into factional fighting. After Solon left in 594 BCE, ambitious men called tyrants tried to seize power. One of them, Pisistratus, finally succeeded in 561 BCE on his third attempt. And he memorably rolled into Athens, accompanied by a 6-foot-tall girl dressed as the goddess Athena. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. But despite being a tyrant, Pisistratus actually maintained Solon's laws. He gave rural farmers access to magistrates, and he transformed Athens into a cultural powerhouse by building temples and instituting massive festivals. Eventually, though, his son ruled oppressively and was driven out, leaving a Spartan garrison of 700 soldiers holding the Acropolis. Then, in 508 BCE, a man named Cleisthenes drove those Spartans out, and in just one single year in office, offered democracy directly to the people. Cleisthenes was a real game changer. He fundamentally redesigned society to achieve isonomia, or equal order. He accomplished this by completely breaking up the old elite loyalties. He mixed people from different tribes and factions, the hill, the shore, and the plain. He made the popular assembly the main legislative body. As a result, there was no longer an us versus them between the government and the citizen. The citizens literally were the government. The old elitist culture was turned completely upside down, and suddenly, ordinary, non-rich Greeks could be heroes in politics.
All right, Section 4, the Golden Age.
This radical restructuring unleashed an absolute tidal wave of democratic energy. It allowed the Greeks to survive the Persian Wars and launch into an unprecedented era of creativity. And we can see exactly what happens when a city-state suddenly realizes its own immense power. Following their victory over Persia, Athens took command of a new protective naval alliance called the Delian League. At first, smaller allied states just paid silver contributions to help Athens build ships. But quite quickly, this evolved. Athens began to aggressively dictate Greek trade. If states were uncooperative, Athens just seized their lands and gave them to Athenian colonists known as clerics. So that protective alliance, it morphed into the highly lucrative Athenian Empire. Under the leadership of Pericles, this wealth and power reached its absolute zenith. The authority of the people's courts, or the Heliaea, became total. Athens became this massive magnet for political exiles and foreign expertise, which obviously caused its economy to boom even further. And with this monumental wealth, they constructed architectural wonders that literally still leave us in awe today, most notably the Parthenon. It was a time of absolute democratic authority and just staggering prosperity. But let's move to Section 5, the paradox of freedom.
All right, we need to slow down for a second here. We have to confront a very uncomfortable truth about this seemingly perfect golden society. Let's revisit that word we mentioned earlier, skole. Classical Greek democracy required immense participation. Citizens were legally obligated to attend assemblies, serve on juries, and participate in state activities. But even in their free time, they were expected to engage in skole, leisure activities like gymnastics, attending philosophy lectures, and poetry recitals. Doing these things proved they were superior and therefore fit to rule. But here's the catch, right? Cultivating your mind and soul requires an enormous amount of free time. You cannot engage in endless civic duties and debate philosophy if you have to labor in the fields all day. And that brings us to the stark, brutal reality. This grand, egalitarian freedom of the Athenian citizen was entirely dependent on the ubiquitous subjugation of slaves. Even the poorest Athenian citizen typically owned a slave. While the free citizens debated logic and built the foundations of Western governments, slaves were doing the clerical jobs, removing dung from the streets, laboring on the farms, and dying in the unimaginably dangerous silver mines of Laurium. Women, meanwhile, were virtually confined to their private homes to manage these domestic issues. The Athenians justified this whole shebang by claiming that those who labored instead of cultivating their minds were naturally inferior and thus deserved to be slaves. The brilliant light of Athenian democracy cast a very, very dark shadow. So what does this all mean for us? It leaves us with a pretty provocative question to end our explainer today. Solon dreamed of eunomia, a societal balance where no single sector dominates the others. Yet the society that built the very foundations of Western freedom and thought rested entirely on the total domination of a subjugated underclass. Can a society ever truly claim to have achieved balance and good order if its wealth and freedom are bought at that price? It's a massive question the ancient Greeks left us with, and honestly, perhaps it's one we are still trying to answer today. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep questioning the water we swim in.